Firstly, I'd just like to make the point that we're very fortunate that His Majesty has allowed us to use Buckingham Palace for this event tonight.
On a day meant to honor the King's birthday, something far more significant took place, something that shook the very core of the monarchy. Trooping the color has always been about spectacle, the gleaming bayonets, the rhythmic pounding of drums, the waves of red uniforms slicing through the London summer air. But in 2025, it became something else. It became a throne without walls, a battlefield of tradition, ambition, and silent rebellion. As the pageantry unfolded with its usual calculated perfection, few noticed the storm brewing just beneath the surface. At first glance, the King's birthday parade appeared flawless. Soldiers marched in synchrony, flags fluttered against the breeze, and the royal family emerged from Buckingham Palace under cheers that seemed to echo through history. But the crown was not as steady as it looked. Behind every royal wave and ceremonial salute lay an agenda, a fracture, a moment waiting to explode. King Charles, seated in his carriage beside Queen Camilla, appeared regal and composed. Yet his presence was symbolic more than sovereign. His health fragile, whispered about behind palace walls, was now dictating tradition. For the first time since ascending the throne, Charles chose wheels over reins. No longer riding horseback, he sat back while others bore the weight of monarchy in motion. And that weight? It was shifting. Princess Anne, known for her steel-like discipline, rode with measured confidence. William the heir maintained his father's legacy on horseback, his gaze unwavering. Catherine the Princess of Wales arrived in elegance, surrounded by her children, beaming to the crowd like she always had. Yet beneath that poised exterior, the world would soon witness her transformation into something much more. She wasn't there just as William's wife. She wasn't there just to smile. She was being positioned to lead. The energy on the mall felt different. Not louder, not faster, but heavier. As if every moment was holding its breath. The crowd clapped and cheered, but those with an eye for palace games noticed subtle shifts. Queen Camilla's carriage followed, not led. Her wave, a little too mechanical. Her smile, slightly forced. And then there was Princess Anne. Her eyes scanned the regiments like a general awaiting the perfect moment. Because that's exactly what she was doing. Beneath the orchestral sound of tradition, a silent script was unfolding. One not written by the king or his advisors but by Anne. And its leading role? Catherine. Not through whispers in corridors or edits to ceremonial roles. No. And would make her declaration in front of the entire nation, wrapped in regalia, in the presence of Charles, the very symbol of the crown. She didn't just plan it, she executed it with military precision. It wasn't just another parade. It wasn't just another birthday. It was a coronation in disguise. A moment carved in tradition, yet utterly transformative. One that would alter the balance of power in the royal family for years to come. But before that thunderous applause and the world-shaking announcement, there were subtle signs hidden in every salute, every glance, and every step down the mall. Trooping the color isn't just a ceremony. It's a battleground of tradition, power, and carefully orchestrated optics. For more than 260 years, this spectacle has stood as the crown's unshakable ritual, a show of unity, strength, and precision. But behind the thundering drums and saluting guards, it's always been about more than military rhythm. It's a chessboard. Every move, every uniform, every placement in the procession is calculated not only to honor the sovereign but to reveal, ever so subtly, where the real influence lies. And in 2025, that truth pulsed louder than the Coldstream Guard's marching beat. The surface told one story. The undercurrent whispered another one that would soon erupt. June 14, 2025. Horse Guards Parade became the epicenter of royal strategy, veiled in scarlet tunics and polished sabers. Over 1,400 soldiers stood in formation, accompanied by 400 musicians whose notes soared through the summer air. The symbolism was thick in the air. The Coldstream Guards, on their 375th anniversary, carried the king's color, a flag of duty, of legacy, of loyalty. And seated nearby, King Charles watched from his carriage, a stark departure from tradition. For decades, Charles had been a rider. Now, at 76, weakened by cancer, he remained seated present, yes, but no longer leading from horseback. The change was not just physical. It was symbolic. For a monarchy built on appearances, this change shouted what the palace tried to whisper. The king's reign was entering a new, more delicate phase. Around him, The old guard carried on. Prince Edward, stoic and composed. Prince William, the embodiment of poised succession, sat high atop Derby, a horse gifted to his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth. His presence was commanding, but familiar. Expected. He represented continuity. And then came Princess Anne, astride her beloved noble, the mare who had once unsettled the king himself. And disciplined, sharp, and always underestimated the road not with grandeur but with quiet command. She didn't smile for the cameras. She wasn't there to dazzle. She was there to deliver. And beside all of this, perhaps the most telling piece of the puzzle was Queen Camilla, riding behind. Her placement was strategic, though subtle. Not beside Charles, but following. Not central, but secondary. Her expression, serene. But those who've studied the monarchy long enough know her silence was not tranquility. It was tense. Because while she maintained her grace, something was unfolding right in front of her, and she was not in control of it. Catherine, radiant in her cream Amelia Wickstead dress, arrived not with pomp but with poise. She smiled, held her children's hands, and greeted regiments with quiet grace. The crowd adored her as they always have. But they didn't yet realize they were watching a woman about to rise. Her ensemble wasn't chosen just for fashion. It was crafted for legacy. The brooch of the Irish Guards gleamed on her chest, a subtle signal of her evolving role. To many, she was just the Princess of Wales. But to those who knew, today marked her ascension into something else entirely. There were no declarations yet. No thunderclaps. Only careful positioning, subtle gestures, and the unmistakable sense that something enormous was waiting just ahead. The music, the steps, the cheers are all distractions from the storm gathering in plain sight. Because while the world watched King Charles and assumed he held the spotlight, the true force was silently taking shape on horseback. Yet it wasn't Charles or Camilla who dominated the day. It was the Princess Royal, rising in the saddle with a mission that no one could have expected. When chaos stirred, it was and who held the reins literally and figuratively. The roar of 300 musicians rose like a wave, crashing into the tense silence that had built along the mall. Spectators were lost in the spectacle. But at the heart of the parade, Noble, the same steed that had once bucked under King Charles, began to shift beneath Princess Anne. The sudden surge of noise, the tight formation of soldiers, the echo of commands was too much for most horses. But Anne didn't flinch. With one slight movement, she gripped the reins tighter, steadying the mare as if commanding the entire moment itself. It wasn't just horsemanship. It was a reminder. A statement of absolute control. That single motion, invisible to many, carried weight far beyond the saddle. This wasn't just about a horse. It was about a monarch's sister reclaiming command in a royal house where clarity was fading and power was up for silent grabs. And didn't speak. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. But her poise under pressure said everything. While King Charles sat in a carriage, limited by illness and guarded by protocol, and radiated strength not by decree, but by presence. And in that moment, she became more than the Princess Royal. She became the monarchy's quiet architect. It wasn't the first time she'd been overlooked. 4 decades, and had served with discipline and humility, clocking more royal engagements than any of her siblings, yet rarely grabbing headlines. But those watching closely understood she wasn't after attention. She was after legacy. And today, the script was finally hers. While others basked in pageantry, and was writing history, stroke by invisible stroke. Every flick of the reins, every firm line in her posture, was an act of orchestration. She wasn't participating in the spectacle. She was controlling it. Even the sounds around her, the cheers, the trumpet calls, the synchronized marching felt like a backdrop to her internal calculation. And wasn't waiting to be handed influence. She had already seized it. No crown, no scepter, just control. She let the anticipation swell. Let the cameras roll. Let the crowd believe the parade was following tradition. And all the while, she moved one step closer to redefining it. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a blueprint. Anne's masterstroke wasn't about commanding the horse. It was about commanding the moment. About delivering stability in a time of royal uncertainty. She knew exactly when to hold still, and she knew exactly when to strike. And strike her at the most unexpected, most meaningful moment. And then, during a moment of silence meant to honor tragedy, and chose to make history. No one expected the announcement. Not even Catherine herself. As the Coldstream Guards paused mid-march and silence swept over the Horse Guards parade, the air shifted from ceremonial spectacle to something deeply human. This wasn't the kind of silence that simply followed a performance. It was the kind of silence that gripped the soul. King Charles, seated solemnly in his carriage, had just led a tribute to the victims of the devastating Air India plane crash. 241 lives lost, including 53 Britons. Black armbands adorned every royal uniform, a shared mourning that connected the monarchy to the people in their pain. But as the silence deepened, something wholly unexpected happened. Princess, and still astride the same horse she had so masterfully calmed earlier, rose in her stirrups with an authority that stole every gaze. Her voice, steady and commanding, cut through the silence like a sword. In full view of the regiments, the royal family, and millions watching on live broadcast, and declared, "I am honored to appoint Catherine, Princess of Wales, as Marshal of the Monarch's honor, to represent the crown in ceremonial salutes to our regiments." Gasps echoed before the applause. It was the kind of moment that rewrote royal protocol in real time. An ancient institution often allergic to change had just reshaped itself publicly, without whisper, without warning. And at the center of it all was Catherine, a woman whose royal journey had been defined by scrutiny, elegance, and quiet strength. She didn't move at first. Standing beside King Charles on the dais, her expression flickered not with arrogance, but with disbelief. For a woman who had endured the silent brutality of public life, survived cancer, and returned to duty without complaint, this was more than a title. It was vindication. As the weight of the crowd's cheers reached her ears, her children George, Charlotte, and Louis watched from a nearby balcony. Their faces lit up, especially little Louis, whose wide-mouthed grin captured the innocence and pride of a family witnessing a legacy being carved in real time. The moment felt more like a ceremony. It felt like a passing of the torch, one that Charles, through his nod of quiet approval, acknowledged with all the emotion he could muster. For a monarch battling illness and facing the twilight of his reign, this was not a mere gesture. It was strategic. And perhaps most importantly, it was personal. Catherine was no longer just William's wife. She was now entrusted with a role that demanded leadership, diplomacy, and the rare kind of grace that the monarchy so desperately needed. The crowd roared louder, not because they were told to, but because they had witnessed something historic, something that wasn't staged but profoundly human. Catherine didn't wave. She didn't beam. She simply placed her hand gently over her heart and bowed her head in quiet gratitude. It wasn't performative. It was sincere. In that single moment, her journey from commoner to consort to commander crystallized in front of the world. And it was, and not Charles, not William, not even the government who had chosen her for it. But what does this mysterious title truly mean? And why was it created now just for her? This wasn't just a promotion. It was a royal masterstroke in disguise. The title Marshal of the Monarch's honor didn't exist until that very moment on the parade grounds. It wasn't drawn from centuries of royal protocol. It wasn't buried in some forgotten archive of titles, once used in wartime or colonial rule. No, this was something entirely new. And yet, its very creation was laced with centuries of meaning. This was a title engineered not to decorate Catherine, but to redefine her. To place her not beside the monarchy, but within it. To give her not a symbolic role, but a commanding one. One that would quietly, but powerfully, change everything. As Marshal of the Monarch's honor, Catherine wasn't just standing in for King Charles. She was now authorized to lead ceremonial salutes on his behalf, placing her at the center of national military occasions, moments previously reserved for the monarch or the direct heir. And while some may have viewed it as a harmless gesture of appreciation, insiders knew better. This was Anne's design. A precise and strategic move to solidify Catherine's role as the monarchy's future heartbeat. And by publicly bestowing this authority, and sent a clear message, tradition would no longer wait for transition. It will begin now. The role tied Catherine to the regiments not just as their figurehead, but as their guardian. Through this title, she became the living link between the armed forces, royal heritage, and public identity. It was an unprecedented blend of honor and responsibility, one typically reserved for reigning monarchs, not their consorts. But that's what made this so bold. Because in elevating Catherine this way, and wasn't just honoring her, she was elevating her above the traditional consort's mold. She was crafting the blueprint of the monarchy's next chapter. And why now? Because Catherine's story had changed. Just 5 months prior, the world held its breath as she revealed her battle with cancer. She had disappeared from public life, only to re-emerge not weakened but renewed. Her remission wasn't just a medical update. It was a resurrection. One that redefined her image not as a passive royal, but a survivor, a fighter, and above all, a leader. And recognized this resilience and chose to mark it in a way that couldn't be ignored. And so, the title became more than a name, it became a symbol. A symbol of continuity and courage. A merging of military tradition and modern strength. A new era where dignity and duty would no longer wait for crowns or coronations. In one move, and honored the past and propelled the future. But while the crowd celebrated, one face in the royal parade wasn't smiling, and her silence spoke volumes. Behind the applause, tension simmered, and Queen Camilla was at the center of it. While the world marveled at the grand gesture unfolding on Horse Guards Parade, not everyone inside the royal circle was clapping. Because beneath the roaring crowd and beneath Catherine's rising star, one key figure had been completely left in the shadows. Sources close to the palace confirmed what many had only speculated: Queen Camilla had not been consulted about Catherine's appointment as Marshal of the Monarch's honor. The decision had not passed through her hands, her council, or even her informal approval. She had been blindsided. And in a family where every movement is micromanaged and every title dissected by tradition, being blindsided is not just humiliating, it's threatening. Her position during the parade made that exclusion visible. While King Charles sat prominently in his carriage, Camilla followed behind in a secondary one, an arrangement that did not go unnoticed by those familiar with royal optics. The message wasn't subtle. Her distance was deliberate. In a pageant defined by precision, no detail is accidental. And this, many believe, was Anne's silent warning. Not to the public, but to Camilla. Whispers began immediately after the announcement. Courtiers described the moment as ice behind the smile. Camilla had worn the role of queen consort with careful grace, managing patronages, navigating public skepticism, and walking the line between support and leadership. But this was different. This was a power play made in public daylight. And it came not from Charles, but from Anne. The Princess Royal had chosen Catherine. And in doing so, she had effectively created a new axis of power, and in Catherine, standing united, silently cutting through the fog of royal hierarchy. The divide was no longer hypothetical. It was structural. And hardened by years of being the monarchy's unacknowledged backbone, had taken matters into her own hands. And Catherine, who had always walked with caution, was now being urged forward by Anne's unapologetic belief in her. That left Camilla alone in a space she had once controlled with subtlety. Her longtime understanding of influence was being replaced by something louder, younger, and to some, more relatable. And for a woman who had fought decades of public scorn just to earn her crown, the sudden shift felt like betrayal. The balcony appearance that followed later that day told the public a different story. Smiles, waves, color-coordinated perfection. But behind those carefully orchestrated images, the fracture had already formed. Camilla stood just off-center, not isolated but certainly not elevated. She had become a supporting character in a script she once thought she co-authored. And the star, now wearing the crown of public affection and armed with a new royal title, was no longer just Diana's successor or William's wife. She was Catherine, the new force the monarchy could no longer ignore. But Catherine had no time to dwell on her first test, as Marshall was moments away, and the world was watching. Her salute wasn't just protocol, it was a declaration. As the Coldstream Guards began their slow, thunderous march past the dais, the eyes of the crowd shifted to Catherine. There she stood, not behind anyone, not beside anyone but forward. Her hand lifted with crisp precision, her posture unwavering, and for the first time, her salute didn't feel like ceremony. It felt like ownership. The sound of boots on gravel, the pounding rhythm of tradition, it all bowed to that single gesture. Catherine was no longer a figure of grace. She was now a figure of command. And in that exact second, the balance of power quietly but irrevocably tipped. King Charles, seated just feet away, nodded. Not out of formality. Not as a rehearsed cue. But with something deeper acknowledgement. He had seen the moment unfold. He had heard the cheers swell and felt the shift in the air. And now, with his own health uncertain and time no longer his ally, he accepted the truth he could no longer delay. Catherine was no longer the future. She was the present. His nod wasn't approved. It was surrender. The kind that doesn't need words. The kind that carries history. Just then, William caught her eye. And in that fleeting moment between husband and wife, prince and princess, future king and now marshal of the monarch's honor, there was no need for conversation. That glance, quick but electric, said everything. It said trust. It said pride. It said, we're doing this together. For years, Catherine had walked 3 steps behind. She had waved, smiled, and stayed silent while the world dissected her every move. But now she stood on ground that had been carved for her. And not by accident, but by intent. The public felt it too. This wasn't Catherine who posed for photos on the steps of the Lindo wing. This wasn't the Duchess who quietly adjusted to royal life while critics questioned her strength. This was the leader they hadn't realized they'd been waiting for. A woman who had weathered storms both private and public, who had battled illness in silence and returned not weakened, but redefined. Her salute wasn't just to the guards. It was to the nation. And the nation answered with thunderous applause. This was no longer about titles or family hierarchy. This was about presence. And on that day, under that sky, Catherine claimed hers. Not just as consort. Not just as the Princess of Wales. But as the embodiment of everything the monarchy wanted to project moving forward: resilience, grace, and command. She had stepped into her power with quiet authority, and the monarchy would never be the same again. And that transformation reached its emotional peak on the palace balcony, under the roar of fighter jets and the weight of a nation's eyes. The future of the monarchy isn't coming, it's already here. As the royal family stepped onto the balcony of Buckingham Palace, the crowd erupted. But this time, it wasn't the king or even the heir who drew the eye first. It was Catherine. Centered, composed, and not alone. Flanked by her 3 children George, Charlotte, and Louis, she stood not as a supporting figure, but as the silent heartbeat of the institution itself. This was not a woman waiting in the wings. This was a leader already in motion. And in her calm presence, the public saw something they hadn't seen in years: a monarchy not weighed down by legacy, but lifted by renewal. Charlotte, poised and alert, mirrored her mother's elegance with uncanny precision. Her subtle gestures, the way she held her head, the quiet command in her demeanor weren't rehearsed. They were inherited. And they were noticed. Observers couldn't ignore the symbolism. The torch wasn't just being passed from Charles to William. It was flowing down a maternal line of grace and steel from Catherine to Charlotte. The future wasn't years away. It was already standing there, 10 years old and ready for whatever came next. Louis, ever the heart of the trio, offered a burst of relatability with his gap-toothed grin and effortless charm. He waved with the ease of a boy raised in ceremony but untouched by cynicism. George, the eldest, maintained a balance, calm, thoughtful, dignified beyond his years. Together, the children didn't just represent lineage. They represented evolution. A generation being raised not in the rigid mold of centuries past, but under the guidance of parents who understood the delicate dance between duty and humanity. And then there was William, close, steady, unwavering. His presence beside Catherine wasn't overshadowed. It was complementary. No longer was the spotlight a contest. It was shared. And in that unity, the monarchy found its most powerful symbol. Here stood a couple not divided by rank or protocol, but strengthened by partnership. The public saw it, felt it, believed in it. For once, the institution didn't just look polished. It looked real. This was the monarchy modernized not through statements or sweeping reforms, but through people. Through children raised with both awareness and affection. Through a mother who had fought battles no crown could shield her from. Through a father who had accepted that leadership was no longer about control, but about collaboration. And through a family that stood together not out of obligation, but conviction. As the RAF soared overhead and the final echoes of the flypast rippled through the skies, the scene on that balcony became more than a moment. It became a message. That this royal family wasn't stuck in history, they were rewriting it. And Catherine, now at the center, wasn't just part of the story. She was shaping the legacy. But what comes next? Catherine's new role is more than symbolic. It signals a global repositioning of the House of Windsor. This wasn't just a moment, it was a message to the world. Catherine's appointment as Marshal of the Monarch's honor wasn't designed for spectacle, though it unfolded before millions. It was designed for substance. In that single declaration, the royal family didn't just elevate a title, they shifted an institution. What began as a symbolic salute quickly expanded into something much bigger, a royal recalibration. One where Catherine is no longer simply preparing for the future, she is defining it. This role isn't about ribbons and ceremonies. It places her on the front lines of royal responsibility, leading global military tributes, representing the crown in times of national grief and celebration, and most of all, embodying the monarchy's moral center when the throne itself cannot. Princess Anne's hand in this evolution cannot be understated. She's long been the monarchy's silent anchor, dutiful, tireless, rarely flashy. Her vision of a slimmed-down monarchy has always been clear: fewer distractions, more devotion. And now, that vision has a face. Catherine, with her quiet strength and dignified grace, represents that ideal with uncanny precision. No scandals. No missteps. Just endurance. And didn't just see Catherine as a future queen. She saw her as the monarchy's strongest chance to survive and thrive in a world that no longer grants royalty a free pass. In a time when spectacle fades fast and substance matters more than ever, Catherine is becoming the monarchy's most valuable asset. But with that rise comes a vacuum. Camilla, once seen as the steady bridge between Charles and public forgiveness, now faces an uncertain path. Her careful diplomacy, her years of silent support, all suddenly feel eclipsed by a new kind of royalty, one the public relates to. Catherine's battle with cancer, her return with unwavering focus, her embrace of motherhood and monarchy alike, it's real. It's painful. It's inspiring. And for a public long tired of opulence without empathy, that's everything. The spotlight has moved. And whether Camilla can find her place within this changing narrative remains a question whispered in palace corridors, but shouted by shifting public favor. Still, this story isn't about competition. It's about transformation. Catherine's relatability has never been a liability, it's her weapon. And paired with her regal composure, it forms a potent combination the monarchy hasn't seen in generations. She's not performing. She's persevering. Every gesture, every speech, every salute carries the weight of survival and the promise of continuity. And when she stood in her cream coat, hand raised toward the Coldstream Guards as the red arrows roared overhead, she didn't just complete a ceremony. She completed a metamorphosis. That was not the image of a consort fulfilling duty. That was the image of a monarch in waiting, commanding respect. This is the future the House of Windsor must now embrace. A monarchy not rooted in entitlement, but earned through example. Catherine's presence at the center of that balcony with her children by her side and her husband behind her was no accident. It was a legacy in motion. It was a crown not handed down, but lived into. The pomp may fade, the uniforms may change, but the memory of that moment will remain etched into the institution's fabric. The world saw a parade, but history saw a coronation of spirit. Catherine isn't just the Princess of Wales. She's now the heart of the crown's future. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.